The wind had a voice that night, thin and weeping, like a widow left too long on her knees. Snow flurried down in slanted curtains, touching everything with a hush that could shatter. It was the kind of evening that made doors creak and lamps flicker, made men wrap their coats tighter and animals huddle near wood smoke. And out there in that slow-falling silence, a woman walked. Ellen Ward was 25, but the way she moved, the way her shoulders rounded and her eyes refused to look too far ahead, she might have been older. Life had pulled years from her, quietly and without apology. Her dress was patched at the elbows. Her boots, too large, had once belonged to a husband now buried behind a rotted church fence in Missouri. The little girl gripping her skirt with frost-nipped fingers had her father's curls but not his fists, thank heaven. 6 years old, small for her age, with cheeks the color of bruised apples and a name too soft for the world she was born into, Anna. The cabin sat like a secret against the white pine logs darkened by weather. A lean-to shed sagged with the weight of snow. Smoke drifted faint from the chimney, as if the fire within hesitated to burn too brightly. Ellen hesitated, too. "You sure he's the one?" she asked quietly, looking down. Anna nodded solemnly. "The lady in town said he don't talk much but he needs someone to cook." Ellen gave a small breath that might have been a laugh, or maybe the end of crying. Then she lifted her hand and knocked. The door opened after a pause long enough to regret. A man filled the frame, tall, shirtless despite the cold, his chest white and bronzed, long black hair falling to his shoulders. His eyes were dark and unreadable, and he didn't blink. Behind him, firelight flickered against clay walls and saddle hooks. The air smelled of smoke and horse and something older. Ellen cleared her throat. "I was told you need a cook." The man's gaze moved to the girl beside her. Anna stared back, unflinching, small hands clutching a doll made from rags and string. The man said nothing. Then, slowly, he stepped aside. That was all. She stepped in, blinking against the warmth. The wood floor creaked under her boots. She glanced once at the hearth. There were potatoes blackening in their skins beside the coals, untouched. The cabin was sparse. One table. One chair. A single bed against the far wall. No curtains, no clock. Just a saddle on the wall and a bough above the door. He shut the door behind them without a word. "I'll make supper, then," Ellen murmured, voice barely carrying. "If that's all right." The man nodded once and walked past her. He sat cross-legged by the fire, pulled a hide over his lap, and began carving something in his hands, a piece of antler, maybe. His silence didn't feel rude. It felt practiced. Anna stood close to her mother as Ellen removed her shawl and moved to the tiny kitchen nook. She rolled up her sleeves and took stock: beans, salt, a few onions strung on a nail. She stirred the blackened potatoes into a pan with water and chopped in what she could find. She didn't ask for help. Didn't look back. Anna sat on the floor near the hearth, warming her small hands. Now and then she peeked at the man, who did not seem to notice her. But when she shifted too close to the fire, he moved the hide slightly outward, a silent gesture. Protection. By the time Ellen turned with the food, her hands were red from scrubbing, but her voice held steadiness. "It's not much. But it's hot." He nodded again and took the bowl she offered. She watched his hands, large, veined, strong. The left bore a scar across the wrist, jagged like lightning. He ate in silence, spoon slow, eyes on the fire. She served Anna and then herself, sitting at the edge of the room, unsure if this was kindness or mere tolerance. Either way, it was better than the barn stalls and back alleyways they'd fled through to get here. Outside, the wind howled again, like some ancient animal pacing the hills. After the meal, Ellen rose to wash the bowls. She winced as her palm met hot water, red where old cuts reopened. The man watched her silently, then stood. For a moment, she thought he might speak. Instead, he disappeared into a back alcove and returned with a small tin and a piece of cloth. He held it out. "For your hand," he said. His voice was deeper than she expected. Rough-edged, but not harsh. "Thank you," she whispered, startled more by the softness in him than the words. Anna yawned, head on the table. Ellen lifted her. I'll put her down, if there's a place. The man gestured toward the barn with a slow tilt of his head. Then he reached to the shelf, pulled down a lantern, and lit it. Handed it to her. Ellen took it. The flame flickered between them for a breath of silence. "Good night," she murmured. He said nothing. She carried her daughter through the snow to the loft above the horses. It wasn't warm, but it was dry. They laid on hay softened with an old saddle blanket she found in the corner. Anna curled into her side without words. Her eyes fluttered shut, trusting. "Mama," she murmured. "Yes? Do you think he's lonely?" Ellen looked toward the window, where the light from the cabin still burned faintly. She thought of the scar on his hand. Of how he hadn't spoken until he had to. Of the way he'd moved the fire hide toward a child he'd never met. "I think he remembers what it feels like to lose someone." Anna didn't answer. She was already dreaming. Ellen watched snow fall through the slats in the loft wall. She did not cry. She hadn't in weeks. She just stared at the quiet and thought, maybe the world hadn't forgotten them entirely. Back inside the cabin, Tattoo Red Elk sat alone by the fire. He stared at the antler in his hand, now half-shaped into the form of a small bird. He turned it once, then twice, then set it down. Outside, 2 sets of footprints led from his porch to the barn. For the first time in a long while, they didn't look like tracks left by strangers. They looked like something returning home. The first full morning came wrapped in a thin veil of frost, the kind that turned fence posts white and made every footstep crunch like glass underfoot. Chickens shuffled in their coop with the lazy rhythm of late winter. Horses huffed steam into the cold air, their breath fogging around them like ghosts. Ellen was up before the rooster crowed. Her fingers, raw from washing the night before, trembled as she split kindling with the hatchet leaning outside the barn. She hadn't asked permission. She didn't wait for instructions. She simply worked, because work kept her upright, and upright meant survival. Inside the cabin, Tattoo sat at the table sharpening a curved knife, slow and methodical. The blade shimmered each time it passed over the stone. He watched her enter with an armful of wood, her breath coming in clouds, her shawl dusted in white. "Coffee?" she asked, not waiting for an answer as she set the pot over the fire. Anna rubbed sleep from her eyes and clambered onto the wooden bench near the hearth, legs swinging beneath her nightdress. Tattoo's eyes flicked to her, just once, but lingered longer than before. She gave him a sleepy smile and whispered, "Morning, mister." He said nothing. But his sharpening paused. Just for a breath. Breakfast was quiet, save for the clink of spoons and the sigh of the fire. Ellen placed 3 bowls on the table, equal portions, and sat last. When Tattoo didn't touch his, she took the salt and passed it to him. He didn't thank her. But he used it. Later that day, Ellen scrubbed the cabin's floors on her knees while Anna followed behind with a rag, making swirls in the wet wood just to leave her mark. Tattoo came and went feeding livestock, repairing a fence rail, shooing off a stray coyote near the chicken run. He never lingered indoors longer than he had to. And when he was inside, he never took up more space than he needed. Ellen watched him once through the window, bare-chested again, hammering a new hinge onto the barn door with calm precision. He didn't shout at the wind or curse the nails when they bent. He didn't mutter. He just worked. In silence. Anna had taken to sitting on the porch, braiding her doll's yarn hair and watching him. She didn't ask questions. Children who had known fear rarely did. That afternoon, Ellen caught sight of the bruises again, old, fading, but still there on Anna's ribs as she bathed her in the tin basin behind the stove. She held her hand over her mouth, not to weep, but to keep from making a sound. Not here. Not now. Anna saw her mother's eyes, read the sorrow there, and leaned in close, whispering, "He never hit me." "I know, baby," Ellen said, cradling the girl's head. "I know." The next morning, Tattoo returned from town with flour, coffee, and a bolt of soft blue cloth. He placed the cloth silently on the table beside Anna's plate, then stepped away as if he'd done nothing at all. Anna blinked at it. "Is this for me?" Tattoo didn't answer. Ellen's voice was barely audible. Say thank you, sweetheart. Anna stood, picked up the cloth with both hands, and carried it to him like a gift in return. Thank you. He nodded once and resumed fixing the drawer hinge that had splintered. Later that week, Ellen ventured into town for lard and thread. She carried a list Tahu had written on birch bark, his letters slanted but steady. The general store was half empty, except for Judith Briggs perched at the pickle barrel, her bonnet tied tight enough to choke a calf. Well, Judith sniffed, seeing her. Didn't expect you to last this long with the red-skinned brute. Ellen folded her hands, thumb over thumb. He hasn't raised his voice. He hasn't raised his hand. That's more than I can say for some churchmen. Judith's lips thin like worn lace. People talk, Ellen. You should consider what it'll mean for the girl. No school will take her. No good man will touch her. She don't need a good man, Ellen replied, voice quiet but steady. She needs a safe home. That night, when Ellen returned, Tahu was carving again, this time by lantern light. The fire had burned low. She placed the groceries on the counter and handed him the change, still wrapped in paper. You're being talked about, she said after a while. So am I. Tahu looked up. She waited, then added, You care? He shook his head. Wind talks too. Still blows past. She allowed a soft laugh. You always that good with words? Not good. Just careful. She sat down across from him, folding her arms. You married before? His hands paused. He didn't look up. Yes. What happened? He set the carving down. It was a bear this time, rough-hewn but noble. He pushed it toward her. Died. She was carrying. White men came. Took our horses. Shot her when she tried to run. Ellen felt a coldness that wasn't from the weather. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Tahu didn't answer. But his eyes didn't harden either. They just held the memory like it was something sacred he refused to release. Anna wandered in from the barn, her cheeks pink and her eyes half shut. Mama, I had a dream you was a bird, she murmured. You flew over the prairie and Papa couldn't reach us. Ellen's heart cracked in some silent, final way. She held her daughter close. Tahu rose and fetched a blanket, draping it over both of them without comment. Then he returned to his chair and resumed carving. The sound of blade against bone was soft, rhythmic, like rain. By the week's end, Ellen no longer asked before starting her chores. Tahu no longer flinched when she touched the kettle or hung washed linens near his bow. Anna had named the hen who followed her around the coop and taught it to peck seed from her palm. One evening, Ellen sliced her hand while peeling potatoes. The cut wasn't deep, but it stung sharp and red. She hissed under her breath. Tahu moved from the fire to her side. He took her hand, cleaned it with warm water, and wrapped it tight in cloth. His touch was firm but gentle. Keep it dry, he said. She nodded. He lingered. His fingers grazed her wrist, then fell away. Their eyes met, and for once, neither of them looked down. That night, as the cabin darkened and wind danced outside, Ellen lay beside her daughter in the loft. She could see the faint flicker of firelight through the cracks in the floorboards. Mama? Anna whispered. Yes, baby? Are we staying here now? Ellen didn't answer right away. Her hand moved to her daughter's curls, brushing them gently. We're not running, she said. That's something. Anna smiled and drifted into sleep. Back in the cabin, Tahu turned the bear carving over in his palm. He placed it beside the bird on the mantel. Outside, the moon cut silver across the fields, and in that stillness, something unspoken began to bloom, slow and quiet and real. Not yet love. Not yet promises. But something stronger than the past and softer than silence. Something like hope. Judith Briggs sat on the edge of the mercantile porch, her lips pinched and her eyes sharp beneath her bonnet brim. The hem of her morning dress didn't quite reach her ankles, revealing sturdy boots planted in judgment. She watched Ellen cross the street with a parcel of sugar under one arm and Anna trailing behind, bright-eyed and swinging a stick like a pretend rifle. Like she belongs, Judith muttered to herself. The town of Willow Creek had never been kind to outsiders, and it was even less kind to women who stepped out of line. Widow or not, Ellen Ward walking beside a child that now called a Lakota warrior paw stirred something bitter in the townsfolk, something cowardly, dressed in righteousness. Inside the general store, Ellen placed her coins neatly on the counter. She stood tall, but her hands trembled slightly when she reached for the bolt of thread. She could feel the glances, the murmurs that quieted the moment she looked up. Anna, unaware or simply used to it, poked at a barrel of nails and hummed beneath her breath. "You been staying with him?" came the voice from behind her. "Judith." Ellen turned slowly. "Yes. That man's got war blood. That ain't a home for a child." Ellen didn't blink. "He's kind to her. He's never laid a hand." Judith leaned in, the scent of dry starch and cold breath hovering between them. "That don't mean folks won't start laying hands on you, girl. Think on that." Ellen gathered her things, lifted Anna's hand into hers, and left without another word. That night, back at the cabin, the table was set with cornbread, salted beans, and boiled carrots. Tahu arrived late from the western ridge, where he'd traded pelts for oil and flour. He hung his coat by the door and glanced at the table, then at Ellen's face. She didn't speak, but he could read it, the tightness in her jaw, the silence too heavy even for her. He poured himself water, sat, and took a long drink. "They said something," he said flatly. "They always do," she replied. Tahu looked at Anna, who was drawing horses on a scrap of bark. "She hear it?" "No. But she's going to. Sooner or later." Tahu's hands folded over his cup. "I was raised to believe silence was power. But maybe not now." Ellen's eyes softened. "Your silence is the only reason we stayed this long." Anna held up her drawing then, beaming. "This one's you," she said to Tahu. "I gave you a lasso." He took the drawing carefully, as though it might break. Then nodded. "Strong horses. I want to ride one." "You will," he said. The next day, Ellen washed linens by the creek while Anna splashed nearby, catching frogs in her boots. The sun came through the trees in slanting gold, warming the backs of their necks. It might have been a perfect day, if not for the footsteps crunching across the leaves. Sheriff Abram Kane stood at the top of the hill, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Miss Ward," he called. Ellen stood, dripping cloth in hand. "Sheriff." He chewed on a toothpick, spit into the dirt. "Town's uneasy. Some say you're compromising yourself. Others say you're putting that little one in danger." Ellen looked him square. "Danger from who?" He didn't answer right away. "I know Red Elk," he said. "He's good with horses. Keeps to himself. But men get lonely. You sure he's not expecting something in return for your keep?" She didn't blink. "I know the cost of a man's hands." Tahu's never once asked. Kane nodded, not unkindly. "I believe you. But town doesn't." Ellen turned back to her washboard. "Then the town can look away." That evening, Tahu came to her with something wrapped in hide. He laid it on the table without speaking. Ellen unwrapped it gently, a leather belt, hand-tooled with wildflowers and the initials EW burned into the inner strap. "For town," he said. She looked at him, unsure. "They watch," he added. "Let them see you as mine. Might protect you." She touched the leather with reverence. "I never asked for protection." He nodded. "I offer it anyway." That night, she wore the belt. Not because she needed it, but because she chose it. The porch became their shared ritual in the quiet evenings. Tahu would sit with his back against the wall, whittling, while Ellen rocked gently with Anna in her lap. Sometimes they spoke of the weather, or the chickens, or the mended fence post. But often, they said nothing. Just sat as dusk bled into dark. "I think you were meant to find us," Ellen said once, eyes on the stars. Tahu didn't answer right away. Then he murmured, "Or maybe you were meant to teach me to speak again." It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something deeper. A trust that didn't require proof. A loyalty built from firelight and small, sacred silences. One morning, Ellen woke to find Anna sitting at the table with a small braid in her dark curls. "Did you do that?" she asked. Anna nodded proudly. "Tahu did it. Said I looked like a prairie girl." Ellen blinked hard, turning back to the stove. Later that week, Ellen passed through town again, this time for a needle and more sugar. Judith stood outside the church, arms crossed. "You know folks are saying you plan to marry him," she said, loud enough for bystanders. Ellen paused. "If I did?" Judith scowled. "Don't mean it's right." Ellen's voice was even. "What is right, Judith? That I should wait for a drunkard with pale hands and dirty words? Or that my child should flinch every time a door opens?" Judith opened her mouth but no sound came. Ellen continued, quieter now. "He brings her pine cones and braids her hair. He built her a step stool so she can reach the wash basin. She sleeps through the night now. What more should I ask of a man?" Judith turned and walked away, her skirt catching on the step. Back home, Tahu was shoeing a horse. Sweat gleamed on his back, muscles moving under sun-warmed skin. Ellen stood beside him, handing tools. "You mad I'm being talked about?" she asked. "No. Even if I say yes when they ask if we're gonna marry?" He looked at her, pausing mid-motion. "Then, they don't get a vote." Her smile was slow, like sunrise behind clouds. That night, Anna drew a picture of the cabin with three figures outside it: Ellen with long hair, herself with her doll, and Tahu standing behind them with a feather in his hair and a lasso in one hand. "Mama," she whispered, "do you think I can call him Pa yet?" Ellen didn't answer. She just kissed her daughter's forehead and tucked her in, heart full, soul quiet. Outside, Tahu stood on the porch, whittling by moonlight, listening to the whispers of a world that was beginning, at last, to understand that quiet men could love fiercely, and that broken women could rise again. And together, under that vast Wild West sky, they were building something the town could never name. But the land would remember. The day began with the hush of heat, no wind, no rustle, just a stillness that made even the birds think twice about singing. By noon, the prairie shimmered beneath a pale sun, and the air tasted of copper and something waiting to break. Tahu was up early, saddling the bay mare, checking the traps near the north ridge. Ellen baked in the kitchen, her hair pinned up with wisps falling against her neck, sweat gathering in the hollow of her throat. Anna helped gather eggs, humming to herself, feet bare in the warm dirt. It was an ordinary day. Until it wasn't. Anna didn't come back after feeding the hens. At first, Ellen thought nothing of it. The girl often wandered to the tree stump by the fence to make daisy crowns. But by the time the sun passed its peak and there was still no sign of her, a tightness wrapped around Ellen's chest like a rope drawn slow. She called her name. Once, twice. Walked the fields. Checked the creek. The old barn. Nothing. Panic rose, not loud or wild, but cold and fast, like a creek in spring. She ran toward the corral, nearly tripping over her hem. "Tahu," she called, voice cracking. "She's gone." He was off the saddle post before she finished the sentence. Didn't ask questions. Just mounted up and rode. She followed on foot, breath ragged, boots catching in weeds. They searched the fence line, the creek bed, the blackberry patch where Anna liked to hide. The sun beat down harder. Ellen's skin burned under her collar. Her legs ached. "Tahu," she gasped, clutching her side. She wouldn't go far. He turned the horse sharply, scanning the fields with hawk eyes. She didn't. The tracks, small, uneven, led west. Not toward the grove or the pond. But toward the town. Ellen's heart fell. They followed them in silence. The prince veered toward the church trail, through dust and summer grass, until they reached the edge of the settlement. That's when they saw it, the old pastor's shed behind the chapel, half in shadow. Tahu dismounted in one fluid motion. He didn't run. He walked. The door was latched shut from the outside with a rusted hook. Ellen reached it first. Her hands shook. "Anna," she called, voice breaking. A muffled cry. Tatu ripped the hook free with one jerk, the wood splintering. Inside, it smelled of damp cloth and kerosene. Anna sat curled in a corner, eyes wide, her doll limp beside her. Ellen fell to her knees. "Sweetheart," she breathed, gathering the child into her arms. Tahu stood above them, unmoving. From behind the corner of the chapel, Judith stepped forward, flanked by two other townsfolk, both men Ellen didn't know well, but had seen in pews. "We were protecting her," Judith snapped. "That child's living with heathens. That ain't a Christian life." Tahu said nothing. Ellen rose, holding Anna tight against her. "You locked her in a shed," she said softly. Judith sniffed. "Better a locked door than a cursed household." Ellen's jaw clenched. Her voice shook, not with fear, but fury. "You think holiness is found in walls? You think God turns his back on kindness because of the color of a man's skin? You put my child in a dark place and told yourself it was light." Tahu stepped forward then. Not fast. Not loud. Just close enough that Judith faltered. His voice was low. "You touch them again, I burn it all down." The two men beside her shifted, uneasy. Judith's bravado faded under the weight of his gaze. "You can't threaten." "I didn't," he said. "I warned." They walked away together, Ellen, Tahu, and Anna, leaving the chapel and its wooden cross behind in silence. The only sound was the dry wind and a child's soft sobs against her mother's neck. Back at the cabin, Tahu cleaned Anna's scraped knee with warm water while Ellen wrapped her arms around both of them. No words were spoken. That evening, Ellen sat on the porch, her eyes on the horizon. Tahu came out, crouched beside the bucket, and rinsed his hands. The sky was pink now, streaked with ash-blue clouds. It looked like something on fire. "I'm sorry," Ellen whispered. "For putting her in their path. For asking to stay." He shook his head. "You didn't ask. You knocked." She nodded slowly. "Then let me ask now." He turned. "Let me stay," she said. "Not as a cook. Not as a guest. Let me stay as yours." Tahu was quiet for a long time. Then he rose, went inside, and returned with something wrapped in deerskin. He opened it slowly in his palms, a bone ring, carved with delicate etchings of feathers and stars. He placed it in her hand. "I was carving this for her," he said, glancing toward Anna's window. "But it fits you." Ellen's throat tightened. "She calls you Pa now." "I didn't teach her that. I didn't ask her to." "You didn't have to," Ellen said. Tahu sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. The ring rested between them like a promise not yet spoken, but deeply understood. Inside, Anna slept soundly for the first time in days, curled up with her doll beside the fireplace. Outside, the wind picked up again, just enough to move the grass, just enough to clear the heat from the day. And across the prairie, fires of another kind began to fade, the fires of judgment, of hatred, of ignorance, and in their place rose something gentler. Not a flame, but a steady light. The morning broke with a hush so still, it felt like the land itself was holding its breath. Mist clung to the ground in a soft veil, silvering the fields and wrapping the fence posts in a dreamy hush. A deer moved near the far tree line, slow and unbothered, as if even the wild thing sensed what this day was. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low and steady. Ellen moved quietly through the kitchen, barefoot, her nightdress trailing just past her ankles, her hair loose for once. She poured water into the basin, watching steam rise as if from a spell being stirred. Anna was still asleep on her pallet by the hearth, one arm curled around her doll, the blanket kicked halfway off. Ellen didn't wake her. She stepped out onto the porch and breathed in the chill, watching the land warm from blue to gold. She held the carved ring in her palm, thumb brushing the smooth edge. The stars etched into it caught the light. She hadn't worn it yet. Not because she was unsure, but because some things should only begin when silence says so. Behind her, the door creaked. Tatu stepped out, his shirt unbuttoned halfway, hair braided and tied low at the nape of his neck. He didn't speak. Just stood beside her and looked toward the east, where the sun slipped over the hills like honey poured slow. She turned, and with no grandness, no question, she held out her hand. He slid the ring on her finger. It fit. No words. Just breath. Just the world, watching. Later, Tatu saddled the horses while Ellen braided Anna's hair with thin blue ribbon. The girl bounced with excitement, though she didn't quite know why. Children often feel joy before they understand its source. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To the cottonwood," Ellen said with a soft smile. "The one with roots in the creek." They rode slow, not as a family yet declared, but already one in truth. Ellen rode behind Tatu, arms around his waist, head resting once against his shoulder. Anna rode in front, small hands on the saddle horn, giggling when the wind caught her braids. The cottonwood stood tall and solemn, its trunk split wide like an old hymn book, its branches still green though autumn whispered close. Beneath it, years ago, Tatu had buried his first love, a mound of earth covered in river stones, her name carved in Lakota symbols into a piece of cedar. Ellen stepped down first, brushing her dress smooth. Anna helped tie wildflowers into little bundles, which she placed gently beside the grave. Tatu knelt, whispered something in a tongue older than English, gentle syllables full of memory. Then he stood, eyes on Ellen. She approached the grave alone. "I never knew her," she said softly, "but I thank her. For who you became. And what you carried forward." Tatu nodded once, as if part of him had waited years to hear those words. They joined hands then, and he took a piece of leather cord from his pocket, winding it around their wrists 3 times. Not a wedding in the eyes of the law. But something older. A ceremony of quiet things. Anna clapped once, beaming. They stayed by the tree until the shadows grew long. Then they returned home, trailing dusk behind them like a second veil. Back at the cabin, Ellen hung her apron on the hook near the stove. Tatu poured water into a pot. Anna fed cornmeal to the chickens, still humming. When the knock came at the door, it was sharp and sudden. Ellen's body tensed. Tatu moved first, stepping forward in silence. Sheriff Kane stood on the porch, hat in hand. Behind him, no posse, no threat. Just weariness. "Evenin'," he said. "Evenin'," Tatu replied. Kane cleared his throat. "Town council met today. Judith ain't on it no more." Ellen stepped beside Tatu, brows furrowed. "She and 2 others were stirring something fierce," Kane added. "After what happened with the girl, well, the council decided to end it." Ellen blinked. "And what?" Kane looked at her with something like shame in his eyes. "The whispering. The watching. The judgment. You ain't just surviving anymore, you're living." And that child's laugh carries all the way to Main Street. Folks hear that, and maybe they remember what mercy sounds like. Tatu said nothing, but his jaw unclenched. Kane handed them a folded paper. "Official recognition. Of household and land. You're now the rightful keeper of both." Ellen stared at it. Not because she needed proof, but because part of her had never expected it. Kane nodded once more. "You done more for this town just by keeping quiet and loving honest than 10 sermons ever did." Then he tipped his hat and left. They stood on the porch long after he rode off. The stars came out, first 1, then 2, then a scatter across the whole white sky. Inside, Anna was lighting a lantern with the help of a matchstick, her face glowing with pride. Ellen looked at Tatu. "We're not just surviving anymore," she echoed. "No," he agreed. They didn't dance. They didn't toast. They just sat beside one another as the wind picked up, gentle and low, threading through the cabin's eaves like a lullaby. Later, Tatu carried Anna to bed, tucking her in with the softness of a man who'd never known how much he needed to be needed. Ellen watched him from the doorway, heart full in a way she hadn't known since before widowhood, since before she stopped believing she could begin again. That night, the fire burned slow. The ring stayed on her hand. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore, it was full of vows, unspoken but understood. And as the moon climbed high, casting pale light over the sleeping prairie, Ellen whispered, "Home. This is home." So if you ever wonder how love begins, know this: it's not always loud. It doesn't always come dressed in flowers or bells. Sometimes, it's a knock beneath the storm. A belt laid quietly on a table. A child's braid done with gentle fingers. A man who never needed to speak to be heard. That's the ceremony of quiet things. And out here, in the wild and wind-washed West, it might just be the strongest kind of love there is.